So I joined the Army in 2010. I left for basic training in March of 2010. The reason actually that I joined the Army, at the time I was married, and it was his lifelong dream. And so I was going to school to be a psychologist. And I decided to join him on this journey. Unfortunately, he didn't pass the ASVAB, and I did. I ended up leaving to basic training. Some situations happened between us, so we ended up getting a divorce right before. And so I ended up going to basic and going to Fort Drum, New York, ultimately. As soon as I finished basic training, I finished AIT. And then from there, I got to Fort Drum, New York. And I was in processing. And as soon as I finished in processing, they were like, okay, go out process. And so I kind of looked at them a little bit confused. And so they're like, oh, you haven't heard, we're going to Afghanistan. All of our equipment already left. And so you have 30 days before we ship out. So I was with my unit 30 days before I ended up deploying to Jalalabad, Afghanistan. And I ultimately learned my job that I had to do overseas. And so that was the challenging part. Definitely was scared for my life when I got there. And as soon as we land, I'm talking about getting our equipment and walking towards kind of the true area that we were going to have. All of a sudden the alarms start going off and the sirens are going off and there's commotion and there's screaming and there's yelling. And it just got real really quick. And so with all of that going on at one time and everyone, yelling, take cover and, get your positions and all of that, you start looking, I'm like, oh, this is going to be my life for the next year. So at that moment, I knew that there was a possibility that I wouldn't make it back home. For me, it was different because in aviation, unless you're working on aircraft or you're one of the pilots, those are really the only type of females you see. You don't really see females too often. And so it was one of those things where there was over 130 males and about 5 females. And it was definitely a challenge. Sexual harassment is really active in the military. And so you have to grow thick skin pretty quickly. And, obviously I'm building my reputation, trying to learn how to hold my own ground, gain respect, earn that, and just kind of get through all the day-to-day tasks and requirements and missions that were required from us. And so with that being said, there was some situations that happened overseas that led to kind of a battle, an internal battle of emotions. When it came to betrayal. And so for me, that went back to the States. We had trial and the person involved had to serve time. And so it was a pivotal moment in my career where I had worked so hard to learn what I needed to do and get through the deployment and kind of stay strong and stay firm. And everything that was going on. That's something that you learn through basic training in AIT. I learned a lot about myself. I grew a lot. I underestimated what I brought to the table and my strength. And that's something I'm very grateful for the military for teaching me because it's something I utilize today. And so with that being said, getting back to the States was challenging as we were going through the trial and all the aftermath. And that was one of the moments where, trauma kicks in and just difficulties maintaining those relationships. And so about a year and a half after is when I left the Army. Initially, when I came back from Afghanistan, I didn't know what I had. All I know is that my emotions were kind of like a roller coaster, but I didn't know how to express it. I didn't know how to put it into words. And so going to see my mental health team, as it was required at that time for everyone in my unit, they were telling me, you have signs of PTSD. And I'm like, well, what is that? Like, I don't know what that is. And so they started explaining. And they started explaining that, I should really consider getting additional help to kind of cope with the transition, right, from the military lifestyle, even from being in Afghanistan back stateside. And then once I was stateside, transitioning out of the military, kind of coping with that, because depression kicks in, anxiety kicks in. You're running on just maybe 2 to 3 hours of sleep. And it's just, it's very difficult to operate in an environment where you don't know how to process what's going on internally. And so that was one of my biggest struggles. Wounded Warrior Project allowed me to be myself again. And the reason I say that is because I was able to learn a lot of coping mechanisms that allowed me to break out of my shell and really put myself out there. For me, I think they came at the perfect time where I was starting to realize what the symptoms were and what I was going through, but also it came during a period where I really needed additional support. I really needed a team there to be able to walk me through and understand and say, you're not alone. The way you act, the way you behave, that's natural. There's other people that behave like you. And I remember going to my very first Wounded Warrior Project event, and I walked in and all the vets were lined up against the wall. And I'm like, I do that all the time, right? When I walk in, I go straight against the wall and kind of, watch everything, where the exits, where this, where that. And everybody was doing the same thing. And so in our gestures and our reactions and the way we spoke to each other and the jokes, and I'm like, you just felt like you were home. You felt like finally somebody understands me. And then the staff was just the icing on the cake, because you can say that you care, but it's your actions that make the difference, right? So they show up whenever you need them. They're a phone call away. They constantly call you. They constantly check up on you. They're always just there. You're never alone. And they truly care. They know about you. They know your story. They know your family. They know what you've gone through. They're non-judgmental. And they give you opportunities to go out there and really kind of tap into those emotions, understand how to cope with them, and then invite you to opportunities, obviously provided by donor dollars, that really give you an opportunity to grow, learn, get resources, educate yourself. Or sometimes you just need a breather. You just need to be around people that think like you, that act like you. And so that's what Wounded Warrior Project did for me.